Some life and career transitions feel more like starting over than switching gears. Welcome to Navigate, everyone. I'm Tim Austin, and this is the podcast designed to take the guesswork out of transition. Whether you have a transition looming in your future, or you're trying to make sense out of a past or current transition, this show's for you. In each episode, we introduce strategies and tools that individuals and teams can use to effectively navigate seasons of change. At Navigate, it's all about leveraging the challenges of change for optimal growth. Today, we'll be having a conversation about starting over. Some transitions feel more like starting over than others, and we'll be talking about why that is and how these seasons can be fertile ground for both personal and professional growth. Joining me today is a guy I first met in Central Asia while I was doing a series of workshops there a couple years ago. John Heaton is an author who writes under his name J.A. Heaton. Having lived and worked overseas for about 10 years with his family, John now lives and writes action-adventure thrillers in Illinois, along with his writing companion, a dog named Ginger. So let's talk about starting over with John Heaton. Hi, John. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Tim. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm really glad we were able to connect today in this conversation. When we first met a couple years back in Central Asia, of all places, you were planning ahead. You and your family were planning ahead for some big changes. And when we talked, I got the feeling that you wanted to be very intentional about processing, planning, and implementing a successful transition for you and your family. So tell me, tell me what brought that about.
Yeah. So before we had met, our family had already gone through a few transitions, and we went through a big one a few years before that. That was unplanned, and it was forced on us. And we watched a lot of other friends go through similar types of transitions. And my wife and I, we realized that, at some point in the future, we're probably going to go through another big transition, whether we plan it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, I don't know how close it was to maybe the first time I met you, but there's a lot of complicated and interrelating factors that would, take a long time to explain, but it really led us towards choosing and planning ahead to make a transition. But I was worried about it. There was definitely some fear involved, and I thought about what other people would think if we made the change. But when it came down to it, and we decided to make the change, we had seen enough people go through a lot of changes, and we felt like, wow, this is really important that we do it well and prepare and plan, not only for our sake, but also for our kids' sake, because they were getting older at that point as well.
Okay. Yeah. So you kind of had a taste of, a forced transition in your past, and seen some of that, and also observing others as they had gone through transition seasons. You mentioned dealing with some of the concerns, even some of the fears around that, what to expect. And certainly, I think when we experience forced transitions, there's always that kind of in the back of our mind when it's a difficult season. Yeah, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to do it this way again. If I have any say whatsoever in the situation, this is kind of how I want to be intentional around that.
Yeah.
And so you did have the gift in this most current transition. You did have the gift of being more intentional, planning ahead a little bit more. I understand. So. And you mentioned your kids, so maybe just kind of start with that too, because we, as we've walked and journeyed with other expat families who are serving, who have served overseas, or just just are making big transitions, there's often a
Mm-hmm.
concern for children and how they're going to do, especially when our children are at certain ages, and we're just concerned: should we make this transition? Is it best for the kids? Should we
Mm-hmm.
wait? Um, yeah, you mentioned fears again. Maybe some fears around that. What were some of you guys' biggest concerns around that?
Yeah. Well, for our kids, when we first went overseas, we had one child, and he was 10 months old. He wasn't even 1 year
Hmm.
old yet.
Okay.
And then by the time we were transitioning to come back to America, we had four children, and I
Mm,
think the oldest one was 10 years old.
okay.
Um, and so, when you only have kids that are very young, they're
Right.
happy and content to go wherever and do
Yeah.
whatever because they're with mom and dad. But when we were looking at making this transition to America, we were taking our kids away from a school that they had loved. We were taking them away from pretty much the only home they remembered. I mean, they
Hmm.
certainly had visited America and knew grandparents and cousins and loved that, but for them, that wasn't home. And
Yeah.
so taking your young kids out of a school and a group of friends that has been all that they know and that they really like it, um, that that was kind of a big concern of ours, and that was why we wanted to try to do all that we could to make the transition back to America um, as smooth and as good as possible, because we realized we were taking our kids away from, in a sense, from the home, the only home that they had known.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, when you see your kids doing well and thriving in a place, but you don't want to upset that delicate balance, right? You're like, this is good.
Yeah.
Should we do this, and how should we do this? But for you, it was more of a decision to the more of the question was, how should we do this? Uh, how can we be intentional about this? How can we set this up for success? Is kind of what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Because we felt like it was a transition we had to make, and although we
Hmm.
we knew it was going to be hard, regardless, it was one we were going to have to make, and
Yeah.
we're going to have to walk our kids through that transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. So now you're on the other side of your transition. Still,
Hmm.
I'm assuming in some aspects of your transition are still current and happening.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're on the other side, and um, how long has that been? When did you actually? How long have you been back in the States?
Um, I think it's been about 9, almost 10 months now
Okay, so
that
not
we've been
even a
back.
year. So it's still
Yeah.
pretty fresh.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, yeah. All right. Now, why talking about going back to starting over kinds of transitions?
Hmm.
Um, why might your particular transition look and feel more like starting over than those previous transitions you navigated?
Yeah. Uh, well, I mean, one thing is the kids.
Hmm.
That's a different factor now. But also, I think for me, um, it for me it was a big professional change. My role and professional work overseas changed several times, and we tweaked it several times,
Okay.
and that just wasn't working out. And
Hmm.
and one of the reasons we made the decision to make a change and go through this transition was the professional piece for me.
Hmm.
Um, and so, okay, I'm going to be starting a new career, a new profession, but we didn't know exactly what that was. Um,
Okay.
and I think it might have been my wife actually who suggested that I pursue writing. because like I said, we'd watch a lot of friends go through transition, and we just observed when seeing people move back to America, it usually took about a year for them to kind of figure things out in terms
Mm-hmm.
of job and money. And so we felt like, it's probably going to take us about a year to figure out professionally, career-wise, money-wise, what is this going to look like?
Yeah.
So my wife said, well, John, why don't you just, focus on your writing for that first year?
So you were
Um,
already writing at that point.
yeah, I mean, it was more of a hobby, and it's one
Okay.
of those things, if you do it slowly and consistently, eventually you have some stuff, you have some
Yeah.
stuff written.
Right.
And so that kind of became the crazy dream of,
Mm.
okay, let's move back to America. And I'm not certain long term what my next profession is going to be, but I'm going to give writing a shot.
Yeah.
That's the big dream. And that's,
Yeah.
honestly, it's a long shot. It seems a little bit crazy when you say it out loud. So it's, in a sense, it's starting fresh for sure.
It sure is, John. And I love what you say about it. Sounds, things kind of can sound crazy when we say it out loud, but
Yeah.
that's the first kind of one of the first steps of moving forward, isn't it? When we actually say it out loud, and we start telling our story. And I think there's something about that really brings about a resolve, an internal resolve to pursue that, even though there's so many unknowns out there. But there's just that internal resolve that kind of gets strengthened and bolstered when we start telling our story, saying it out loud, like you said. Yeah. So how has that been for you? How have you've been back for about 9 or 10 months, and
Hmm.
pursuing that big professional shift in terms of your uh, career, vocational focus. How has that been so far for you?
Yeah, I've been working hard at it, and it's one of those long-term things that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it can make money, but not not right away, not fast
Right.
typically. So there's definitely some patience involved.
Yeah.
Um, but also um, we've been very aware of the fact that, um, yes, I'm pursuing writing, but I'm not going to allow that to consume me for 80 hours a week,
Mm-hmm.
because our priority was going to be focusing on our kids a lot, and just kind of allowing space and time for my wife and I to be able to talk things through and process
Mm-hmm.
things emotionally. So the working on the writing um, has been a good learning process. I've been able to work at it,
Yeah.
but I've also, because we've had this plan in place, I haven't allowed it to totally consume me and take over all of my time,
Mm-hmm.
in an effort to speed up the process in hopes that it will make money faster.
Yeah.
Um, but having said that, there certain fears arise of like, oh wow, I have put so many months into this creative endeavor, which, like I said, it sounds crazy. I mean, how many people do you know who say they want to write a book? Well, lots of them, but you know what? Probably almost none of them are making a living doing it. So, so then it's like, okay, I've been working at this, consistently for months, and what if we get to the end of our first year of transition and it was an abysmal failure? How am I going to feel then? Um,
So
so
dealing
that
with some of those what ifs,
yeah,
what if questions. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, dealing with what ifs.
Yeah.
But I remember when we were trying to make our decision whether or not we should transition, because um, it was a complicated decision, and there were a lot of great things about where we were overseas. It was not an easy decision. Like I mentioned, our kids really liked it there.
Yeah.
I worked with a lot of great guys, and I
Mm-hmm.
really miss working with some of those guys.
Right.
Um, but there were some things professionally in my role and other things that were language related that it just wasn't working out. And as I kind of wrestled through those things, I remember coming to the point of thinking like, oh well, at least I don't have to worry about money. I kind of know how I'm going to support my family, but if I make
Mm-hmm.
this transition, I don't know exactly how I'm going to provide for my family
Yeah.
and make
Yeah.
money.
Sure.
But I could sit back and I could imagine, if I was talking to somebody like me, like if I put myself in somebody else's shoes and I was listening to them talking, it'd be like, hey, you can stick it out for a little bit because you feel comfortable with the paycheck, but that's got to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Eventually
It,
that has to change.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
being able to put myself in somebody else's shoes, and now I
Yeah.
still remind myself of that now. Of hey, no, that was a good, solid decision that we made.
Mm.
And yeah, it can seem a little bit crazy investing so much in this creative dream, but it was a solid decision that we made.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're moving forward with it. Um, and I can be afraid of what if it fails, um, but so what if it does fail?
Mm-hmm.
I've gained a lot of great skills and experiences, um, and it's possible it might not totally fail. There is that
That's
crazy
right.
possibility as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. You have been able to pursue this because you as a family, you with your wife have agreed to give this some time, from what I understand, some time to see how it unfolds. It's not like, you've made this decision in isolation. And so you have, you have the support behind you of your family, which is number one. And you have the leading of God in your life, and so I feel like, when you talk about that, the big dreams that we have and doing the things we're passionate about and love to do, like you said, whether that works into full time or goes back to or remains a hobby, it's still doing something you love and you're learning a lot and you're growing a lot through it. And
Hmm.
it's still in motion, right? The story is still unfolding, and this adventure that you're on, this
Hmm.
crazy dream that you're pursuing, all of that is still, it's part of the story that you're going to have, and be able to share with others, and be able to share with your family. So there's a lot of things that are really, I feel like super, super encouraging to hear how someone transitions not just into a comfortable role, but you're making a big transition into a lot of unknowns. But you're willing to put up with a lot of those unknowns and to deal with some of that because you have a desire and a passion and a motivation in this one area. Um, yeah. So, there's always that degree of risk, isn't there? Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, but um, a degree of risk can go hand in hand with seasons of starting over. Um, so, can you comment on that a little bit, John? How has risk been a factor in your transition?
Yeah. I mean, as a husband and a father, I feel like the provider for my family, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of how I mentioned when I was in my previous role, and I felt like, well, hey, at least like I kind of know, where the money comes from.
Yeah.
Um, I felt like making the transition was a huge risk, um, and a lot of that centered around the money and the question of how would I um, provide for my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, in a lot of cases, in the middle of transition, it might not feel like it, but a lot of times the risk is not as bad as you fear it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you also have to be aware that, sometimes the risk of not making a transition out of fear or worries can be really huge.
Yeah.
I don't, as humans, I don't think we're very good at assessing risk truly. And we can be blind to risk, the risk of not making a change and going through a transition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So kind of staying in a comfortable role simply because it's comfortable, and even though you may not be doing what you love, and really there's no prospects for a future in that, you're saying that there's a lot of people out there, and they can be in any profession, any ministry, vocation, you name it. There's a lot of us out there who struggle with this, don't we? This whole risk assessment piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of go back to whenever you see God calling people to do something, to pursue something in the scriptures, there's always some degree of risk, usually a big degree of risk, and so certainly this risk goes hand in hand with starting over, doing something different, and I'm sure as you talk, you've dealt with some of these questions. Are the rewards? This is my next question. Then, are the rewards worth it? How have the rewards been worth it thus far for you?
Yeah, I think one thing for me that makes it worth it is, within the last few months, I've been tempted to kind of throw aside my creative writing and, hey, let's just find some other job, some other work that, I mean, there's easier and faster ways to make some money, right? I mean, and besides, my writing will probably fail anyways. So
These are the questions. These are the.
I've been tempted.
Yeah.
I've been tempted to go that route.
Yeah.
But I realized I would never know, like, well, what if I gave it a shot? Like, I have this time,
Yeah.
to give that creative dream a shot. And regardless of how it works out, I can live without regrets. I can know that, I gave it a shot. It didn't work out, and move on. Or I gave it a shot and it worked out great, and move on. I feel like people just, live with regrets that they don't have to, because they're, I don't know, afraid or worried to go through transition and make a change.
Yeah. And the rewards. So I kind of hear you saying the rewards are some of those rewards are just that internal piece of fulfillment and satisfaction, and just kind of the reward of knowing that you've pursued this, you've followed that dream, you've stepped out into the unknown, into the uncomfortable, and you are now in good company with a lot of faithful God followers who have done the same thing. And I think when the story is all told, and we look back, or our life is kind of played out in front of us, I just don't feel we're going to regret those times, when those seasons we're in, when we've really stepped out like this and done something like you're doing, pursuing a dream.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, kind of on the opposite side, it's very easy to look back and regret, oh, why didn't I try that? Why didn't I give that a shot? Why was I afraid of that? Why was I worried about that?
So true.
Yeah. And so just to, live without those type of regrets is is an awesome reward.
Yeah, yeah, that in itself. Yep, that's for sure. Well, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, John, what would you say to a listener today who might be facing a big ministry or career shift and is feeling lost in that fog of uncertainty and possibly struggling with some of the fears that we talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I think we can pretty clearly say that everybody is going to make a big shift at some point. I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you might choose it. It might be the rug pulled out from under you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to happen. So, if you're not in that right now, build your support networks now so that you can,
Mm-hmm.
rely on them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Have a group of close friends and advisors that you can share anything with.
Good.
I know, a lot of personal finance advisors say that you should have an emergency fund.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's vital for, going through a lot of transitions
Mm-hmm.
is having some financial flexibility. But if you're in the midst of it, don't be afraid to slow down, step back,
Mm-hmm.
talk with people close to you. I know you can feel pressured to move fast and make fast decisions, but a lot of times you don't really have to, even if you might feel that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Be willing to receive feedback from other people. Are your fears completely overblown and irrational? That could be the case.
Mm.
But then, lastly, for a lot of people, I remember you shared this with me a while ago, and it really stuck with me that when you're going through transitions, creativity can really flourish.
Mm.
And that really grabbed me because I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
of focusing on my writing. And I've found that to be true, that, look for opportunities for your creativity to flourish. The
Good.
uncertainty that comes with transition can bring a great gift, kind of when you get knocked out of your routine and your rut, new ideas
Yeah.
come alive, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they'll express themselves in your hobbies,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they'll express themselves in your art. But that can be a really exciting thing to see, regardless of what your creative endeavor is.
That's good. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Take advantage of leverage that creativity that is, that can be part of a transition season, whether that's creative ideas and thoughts that come from others, from the Lord, from our own processing times. Super, super good advice. It really can. Transition seasons can be a real creative season as we step out and into new territory, and actually maybe depend on I think there's something there that has to do with dependence, because when we step out into these new and unknown areas of our lives, there's a dependence piece, right? We depend on creative thoughts and ideas moving
Mm-hmm.
forward. We need that. Before we didn't so much, maybe, but now we do, and so that opens up a great opportunity for the creativity piece. Great advice to land on as we wrap up our podcast today with John Heaton. Hey, thank you so much, John, for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim.
You bet. And to learn more about John and to grab one of his books, visit him on Facebook at J.A. Heaton Author, or go to his website, flannelandflashlight.com. And you can get a glimpse into what John is doing on the other side of transition now, pursuing his creative dream. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.
When we made a big starting over transition as a family after 20 years of living and working overseas, there were a lot of concerns about what lies ahead What were those next steps that we needed to take? But there were also a lot of creative moments, times when we could process, have conversations together, plan, and even journal our experience. And leveraging those creative moments gave us perspective and purpose moving forward. So I want to encourage you, leverage those creative moments in positive ways. Get creative in your conversations, in your processing, in your planning. Pray into those creative moments as well. The rewards are worth the risk. As a coach and someone who has navigated big family and career transitions, I can help you leverage the uncertainty of starting over while crafting an action plan for successful transition. Book a discovery call with me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com if you're interested to learn how working with a coach can help you grow during this time of transition. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin. If this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. And I'll see you there.